was asked by another former Senate colleague, Vice President Joe Biden, to join him as his preferred nominee to be Vice President of the United States. I've come to know Senator Harris in her 4 years in the Senate, as many of us have through her service on especially the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee. Her public service track record is a significant one, worthy of praise, from her work as a district attorney, first a line prosecutor and then the elected district attorney in San Francisco, where she focused on trying to keep her community safe, to service as California's Attorney General, broadening the portfolio to include environmental justice and consumer protection, and now her work in the Senate since 2016. What I find so compelling about Senator Harris, in addition to her track record of public service during a very long career, is her personal story. Raised as the child of two immigrants, a Jamaican father and an Indian mother, as so many in this country, raised as children of immigrants, developing a passion to serve and a patriotic love of country. She's the first nominee, African-American woman nominee, ever to be on a ticket. She's the first South Asian person of South Asian descent ever to be on a ticket. And in the year 2020, when we are commemorating the 100th anniversary of the amendment that guaranteed women the right to vote, I can think of no greater way to celebrate a centennial than for one of our colleagues who is a woman to have a chance to break a glass ceiling that still has existed, whereby no woman in this country has ever been a vice president or president. We're so good at so much in this country. In fact, we're so good at many things with regard to women in this country, but we are sort of uniquely bad in electing women to higher office. In Congress right now, 24% of Congress is women, and that ranks us 76th in the world in terms of our percentage of women in a national legislative body. We're tied with Afghanistan, but we trail Iraq, Canada, Mexico, and many other nations. So regardless of how it all works out between now and November, and regardless of our own political affiliations, this is a good day, I believe, for the country, and a good day for the Senate when one of the 100 is recognized in such a way and introduced to the American public with an opportunity to serve at a significant level. Returning to the latest coronavirus emergency aid package. Currently, the package doesn't exist. There have been no bipartisan negotiations on it since last Friday. And that's disappointing to all of us who are here, ready and willing to negotiate and vote for a strong bipartisan relief package. The House of Representatives passed its strong package back on May 15th, now nearly 3 months ago. Today's August 12th. There was some hope that maybe COVID cases were ticking downward. At the end of May, there was some hope that maybe the economic devastation was reducing, but COVID cases did not tick down over the summer, as some have hoped. In fact, they have ticked up in many parts of the country. And the Senate has not taken any votes on the House bill or indeed on any bill. That's disappointing. But more than that, it's disappointing for millions of Americans who are in the midst of hard times right now. They're worried about their own health or the health of their loved ones. They're worried about whether they'll receive unemployment benefits, or how they'll make rent or the mortgage, or how their children will get an education. We know in this body we can transcend politics as usual to address coronavirus, because we did so in March by passing the CARES Act. Even as members of this body, including me, were getting coronavirus as we were having those negotiations. Even as staffers were getting it, even as Senate spouses were getting it, we stayed to the table and we found a bipartisan bill that helped us deal with the challenge for a few critical months. But we're here debating this again because the magnitude of the crisis is not a crisis of a few months. No, it's such that the aid provided thus far is running out while Americans' hardships continue. And that's why it's essential that we not give up and that we stay here as long as it takes to come through for the American people. I've heard some in Congress, indeed some in this body, say about more federal aid for coronavirus response, I just don't see the need for it. Indeed, the majority leader has candidly acknowledged that approximately 20 members of the Republican caucus will not vote for more aid. Well, I want to make the case first that there is need for it. And the need is undeniable because the circumstances that people are living in are dire. Last Friday, we found out that the unemployment rate in July was 10.2%, which is a number that is higher than at any point during the 2008-2009 recession. The president called this great jobs numbers, but I don't see anything great about 1 in 10 Americans who are in the workforce not being able to find work. More than 30 million Americans are collecting unemployment benefits, and last week their benefit checks were cut by more than 50%. In Virginia, just as an example, unemployed workers are now receiving a maximum of $378 a week. That's not enough to pay rent, let alone rent, groceries, childcare, electric bills, and many other costs that families face every day. Because they lost their jobs and other income, millions of Americans are now at risk of eviction or foreclosure. The $600 federal unemployment benefit and federal eviction moratorium were holding this off for many, but with those relief measures expiring, families are unable to continue paying their August or September bills. One estimate is that 12 million evictions will be filed by October. 12 million is essentially the combined population of about 6 or 7 states. There could be that many evictions filed by October. Just in Virginia, there was a state-imposed eviction moratorium that lapsed for 5 weeks, and just in those 5 weeks, nearly 10,000 evictions were filed, potentially forcing people out of their homes. 3 in 10 Virginia renters surveyed a couple of weeks ago said they were uncertain how they could pay August rent. And it was more than half of all African-American renters surveyed said that was the case. Housing instability is difficult at any point in time, but imagine losing your housing during a pandemic. What are people supposed to do during a pandemic? The advice is if you can, stay home. Don't go out. Don't be with others. That will help keep you and your family safe, but how can you quarantine at home if you are in danger of losing your home? Like the senator, the majority leader, who quoted from constituents in Kentucky, I'm hearing from Virginia constituents every day. From Allison and Enrico, I've now exhausted my savings account. I have rent due, groceries to buy, and bills to pay. I am now desperate for immediate help. From Reese in Mechanicsville, I have 3 children, one with significant special needs. My wife can't work now due to COVID-19 and school closures. I'm behind on numerous bills, including mortgage, utility, and other bills. From Dominique in Fairfax, my rent is now 3 months behind, as well as my other bills, and I'm receiving letters threatening evictions and services being turned off. Unfortunately, these examples are now not aberrations, but they're common. We all know people who are at risk of losing their home or being hungry or losing health care or their savings being depleted because of the absence of work. So we have to make sure that people are not removed from their homes in the middle of a health crisis. We need to make sure that they can continue to pay bills until the health crisis is sufficiently addressed and the economy gets back to where it was. Schools and colleges across the country are trying to reopen right now. Doesn't matter if it's in person, online, or a hybrid model. We want them to reopen safely right now, and this is the time to provide schools with the resources they need to deliver quality instruction, not punish them for following public health guidance and data. Working families are struggling to find child care options. This is critical to reopening the economy. And child care providers themselves are struggling. Virginia and the nation, according to national surveys, is at risk of losing 45% of its licensed child care capacity. That's 130,000 child care slots in Virginia without the additional support they would need to help them stay viable. And if we lose child care capacity, that will have a significant consequence in terms of the ability of people to go back to work so that the economy can start to grow again. On the nutrition front, we're facing an unprecedented rise in food insecurity as thousands of Virginians and millions of Americans have newly enrolled in the SNAP program. The Brookings Institute estimates that nearly 14 million children are living in food insecure households, 14 million children. That's nearly 6 times the number of children who were food insecure just as recently as 2018, and nearly 3 times as many who were food insecure during the peak of the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. I bet all of my colleagues have experienced this because we're all out in our states talking to folks. Food banks have been slammed with demand that they've never witnessed before, and it's been harder for food banks to get grocery access because grocery store shelves have also been ravaged as people are going to grocery stores while restaurants are closed. So what do food banks do? Increasing demand and then fewer donations from grocery stores. Capital Area Food Bank purchased 100 semi-truckloads of food in April, which was triple what the food bank purchased in all of 2019, just in 1 month. They tripled their entire purchases compared to 2019. And the Blue Ridge Area Food Bank, which serves the western part of my Commonwealth, saw the number of new families seeking food assistance quadruple from last year, just as of May. So Americans are in a dire state. Their basic needs are at stake. We Democrats want to address that hardship. We did address that hardship in the HEROES Act, which was passed in mid-May. We want to keep people from losing their jobs, being evicted, and going hungry. Now, I know that there are many Republicans who share these same goals, but the proposals that have been on the table in this body are simply inadequate. There are areas that we agree on. Aid to small business is important. Broadband is important because as people telecommute or get telehealth or get educational content online, they have to have access to broadband. Testing is important. Childcare is important to open the economy. These are important priorities I believe we can come together on. But the Republican plan that the Senate GOP introduced in this body, which the majority leader again acknowledges that at least 20 members of the caucus will not support, has large cuts to unemployment aid, no state and local government aid to prevent layoffs to first responders and vital programs and services. The majority leader characterized state and local government aid as a slush fund. I was a mayor. I was a governor. I know what's happening to state and local budgets. And when the revenues to state and local governments decline, there's about one place they can go. And the one place they can go is furloughs, waivers, salary cuts, cutting personnel. The overwhelming majority of the first responders in this country work for state and local governments. It's never a good time to cut police, fire, EMT, ambulance, healthcare workers. Never a good time, but the worst time to do it is in the midst of a global health pandemic. It's not a slush fund, it's a necessity that the communities where people live and work have basic services to get through this challenge. The Republican proposal had inadequate education aid, no aid for the eviction tsunami that's facing us to provide rent or mortgage assistance, no nutrition aid in the SNAP program or otherwise to help these 14 million kids who today are living in food insecure households. The Republican proposal did include a comprehensive liability shield to prevent anyone from suing if their employer's negligence causes a virus outbreak. I thought it was interesting that so often on the other side of the aisle in this body, when this prospective bill has been talked about, that's been at the front of the line as if the worry about lawsuits is the biggest concern that the American people have right now. No one in Virginia, when they tell me about their concerns, is putting worries about lawsuits up at the top of the list. They're talking about food and hunger and health care and housing. The liability shield proposal in the GOP goes even further than protecting against liability. It wipes out states' abilities to pass safety regulations. Virginia became the first state in the country to do an emergency temporary standard to provide guidance to public places and employers about safety standards that they could use on the job. And it's good to get advice about safety standards because most businesses don't have an NIH or a CDC or a health department. So advice about standards that should be followed in workplaces is a great idea. Virginia became the first state in the country to do that. The Republican liability shield would not only give people liability protection, but it would take away the ability of the states to do what Virginia did to try to create life-saving protections for workers and customers. That's unacceptable. Unacceptable. Democrats offered to meet halfway. We knew when the HEROES Act passed, We've been around the block a few times. It wasn't as if the Senate Republicans were just going to say, that's a great idea, and we'll just vote for it. That's not the way things work. The Senate Republicans would have their proposal just as the House Democrats had their proposal. The two proposals had dramatically different price tags. The Senate proposal, together with the White House, came in the neighborhood of $1 trillion, and the House proposal came in the neighborhood of $3 trillion. So the Democrats said, and there's nothing magic about these numbers, but it is important to understand that willingness to compromise is something that Americans expect of us right now. Democrats said, okay, you have a package that's worth $1 trillion. We have a package that's worth $3 trillion. Let's split the difference. We'll have to decide how to compose the $2 trillion package, but let's split the difference. And the White House refused. The White House got an offer to meet halfway and said, that's not what we're going to do. We insist on the skinny version. The skinny version is inadequate to meet the challenge of the moment. This is the worst economic contraction in the 145 years where we have measured quarterly economic growth in this country. And this is the worst pandemic that the United States has dealt with since the Spanish flu of 1917, 1918. A narrow bill isn't enough. If you don't like the Democratic bill because you think the price tag is too big, how about meeting us halfway? That's the way negotiations so often happen. After the White House rejected the notion of meeting halfway, the president issued executive orders that he claims break through the logjam. Like many things the president does, though, analysis of the executive orders demonstrates there's little substance there. The president proposed to defer payroll tax collections. That doesn't actually give Americans more money. It just gives them a larger tax bill next year. Because it's a deferral, but the president cannot lift the obligation off either the employers or the employees. It's also very confusing to employers to suggest, okay, you should defer, but it's likely to start back up again. That is very, very hard for employers, especially small employers, to figure it out. And we all know that the payroll tax is the main pillar of Social Security, as every generation pays into the system while they're working so that they can enjoy retirement with dignity in their senior years. President Trump has said this isn't just a deferral, that if he has his way and is reelected, he's going to permanently cancel the tax. That would undermine retirement security for all future generations. The executive order with respect to housing did actually nothing. It just ordered agencies to look into delaying evictions and foreclosures, but no assistance, no dollars for those facing eviction or for those facing foreclosures. Look into, can you delay them? Governors are already saying that the executive order dealing with unemployment aid is unworkable. It would be very difficult for them to reconfigure their UI systems to do what the president has asked them to do and asked them to help pay for in the executive order. Even if states could figure out how to launch a completely new system, the benefits would run out in 5 weeks. On the surface, the executive order with respect to student loan relief looks like an automatic extension of the CARES Act, but if you dig into it, that's not what it is. The order leaves out 8 million federal student loan borrowers, and it doesn't even mention whether borrowers' credit ratings and credit scores will be protected if they take advantage of what's offered them under the EO. And what about the millions of students who are struggling to financially find a way to go back to college, or the schools that are trying to find a way to still make sure students get an education when they reopen, or the working families that are struggling to find childcare? School boards and superintendents around the country have come with a proposal saying to open schools safely would cost about $175 billion, and that's what Democrats have put on the table. That is not addressed at all in the executive orders, even as we stand at the threshold of school reopening. In sum, the president's executive orders address virtually none of the hardships, solve virtually none of the hardships, lift virtually none of the burden that Americans are suffering through right now. So we're having hard times. We're having hard times. And it's our duty to try to address that hardship. Democrats are willing to compromise. When we say, hey, we got a plan, but we'll meet you halfway to your plan, and the White House says no, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? A skinny version isn't sufficient for the magnitude of the crisis. The Senate Republican proposal has some elements that we support, but at least so many others unaddressed that it's not adequate. The Republican White House has rejected compromise, and President Trump's executive orders are partly illegal, partly unworkable, and completely insufficient. It doesn't have to be this way, because there are many areas on which we can find agreement. And I know many in this body are hearing from their home states and governors and mayors and local governments and colleges and universities and school boards and housing authorities and food banks and hospitals and the chambers of commerce. You're hearing the same thing that I'm hearing from Virginians. So as I conclude, Mr. President, it doesn't have to be this way. We can put together a good bipartisan deal, but it can't be a White House my way or the highway. It has to be a willingness to meet and find compromise between a Democratic proposal and a proposal that is acceptable to at least some on the GOP side in the White House. Any large compromise in divided government is bound to be imperfect, but I am reminded of a quote from FDR during the Depression years. You never really had to use quotes from the Depression because the magnitude of the Depression was different than what I've experienced during most of my life, but now quotes from the Depression, I think, bear some revisiting. And here's what FDR said. As the administration and Congress at the time were doing everything they could to figure out a way to help out needy Americans. Better the occasional faults of a government that lives in a spirit of charity than the consistent omissions of a government frozen in the ice of its own indifference. By now, everybody knows somebody who's gotten COVID-19 or somebody who's gotten sick or even died, or somebody who's lost a job, or somebody who's worried about rent or food. We all know those people, and many of us have experienced this in our own families. Are we going to help? Or are we going to be frozen in the ice of our own indifference? Let's surprise the cynics. Let's work together and get this done. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. President.